All right, so as you just saw through some of our cartoons, let's go through and talk about some of the challenges and some of the solutions for immigrants. So here's just a list of some of the immediate challenges that immigrants faced when entering the country. And you have to remember a lot of these immigrants are entering with just the bags on their backs, right? So they're not bringing a lot, they don't have a lot. Excuse me. Um, so a lot of these immigrants are having a hard time, literally, once they step off the boat. So some of those places, let's see, like finding work. Even though they're oftentimes are in large, dense population areas, the language barrier, which is another problem, understanding the language, is going to prevent them from being able to find enough work. And being able to find work because they are poor and don't have hardly anything with them to begin with, finding a job immediately and being able to secure a paycheck so they could, for example, find a place to live, which wasn't always easy. And housing was expensive enough and jobs paid poorly enough that a lot of times the entire family had to get jobs just to be able to afford rent. And finding a place to live, even a whole family with jobs might not be able to afford rent. So you might have to team up with another family. And their whole family had jobs too, so that you guys can combine your group salaries to pay for rent. Um, so we'll hopefully see this next week, but there's a lot of overcrowding in these immigrant neighborhoods, and maybe two or three families per an apartment to make sure that they could actually afford it. Now, another big thing is trying to find family and friends. So as immigrants came over, they were looking for people who came before them, or just finding their family and friends in new areas. And because of this, this is where we get a lot of sort of these neighborhoods that are sort of centric to a particular nationality. So, for example, in St. Louis, we have the Hill, and the Hill is a predominantly Italian neighborhood. And one of the reasons the Hill develops as sort of a famous area for great food in our area is because during this time period, a lot of the Italians that came to town would settle in a similar spot, and like Little Italy in New York, for example. And this would make it easier to find your family and friends. And even if you didn't, if you were able to find your way to the Italian part of town, for example, at least you could have sort of that culture and familiarity of your people from your own country to sort of help as you settle in. So you sort of have a support system there, even if you can't find your friends and family. So that's why things like I said, the hills start to develop, and more towards the Bevo area. That's sort of a German central area in St. Louis. So you kind of get these areas in St. Louis and all over the country where we have these German neighborhoods or these Italian neighborhoods, right? And a lot of that is because the immigrants coming from over from this time period would want to try to settle near other people that have come over from their countries. We already talked about understanding the language. That's going to be a huge barrier, particularly for the new wave of immigrants, where they're speaking Romance language, they're speaking Slavic languages that are completely different from the Germanic English, and making it just all that more difficult, not knowing the language at all. And then, as we talked about, they're going to face massive discrimination, and they're going to be threatened with con men and people trying to con them. And even though they have very little, there are people who are literally trying to steal what little they have this the second they step off the boat. We're going to get to that in a second. But they're still having to face with this anti-immigrant backlash, this nativism in the United States. So on top of all the other challenges, they're not very welcome here by the United States. And although the government will let everyone in and all that kind of stuff, the population here is going to, like we discussed, is going to not necessarily support this new wave of immigrants because of how drastically different they are, language-wise, culturally, religiously, from what we're used to here in the United States. So let's take a look at an example of this getting conned. I have another political cartoon for you that really gets at the heart of kind of how a lot of these immigrants would try to get conned as soon as they literally are off the boat. So this cartoon takes place at Castle Garden. You can see that up here at the top of the building here. And Castle Garden is one of the first spots where immigrants would come in. So for about 35 years or so, Castle Garden in Manhattan was where immigrants would disembark, basically. So you can see the boats in the background. So the boats would come over from Europe. They would let them off at Castle Garden, and Castle Garden would be the immigration spot in New York City. Sorry about that. Because of situations like this that we're about to discuss, Ellis Island and Angel Island, a couple other places were developed as the main immigration hubs or disembarkation points in New York. But here you can see all of the immigrants fresh off the boat with their kids, with their bags in hand, basically with only the things that they have brought with them. You can see the varying cultures that are in through here that representative of this new wave of immigration. But the second they step off the boat, so to speak, here at Castle Garden, they are waylaid by all of these traps, right? So basically, all of these con people, con men, will be laying these traps, so to speak, trying to quote unquote catch the immigrants as they're off the boat. So one thing they have here, I keep doing that, sorry. One thing they have here is like the friend from the old country. So you might have someone pose as being, "Oh yeah, I'm your friend. Don't you remember me from years ago back in Italy? Yeah, I know where your family is. I know where your friends are. Because we're old friends. So let me take you to them." And then what they would do is lead them down to a dark alley and then mug them and take them for all that they had. And so you can see that there are a lot of these sort of traps that are laid out. These are all supposed to be like different cons that would be here trying to take advantage of immigrants. And then over here you can see one has actually been caught in the trap here, and they're being sort of proverbial metaphorically pulled down into this hole here as they're trapped uh, by a lot of these con people who are basically just laying in wait on their easy prey. And immigrants were fairly easy prey. They didn't speak the language for the most part. They were in a completely new situation, completely new country, and so they were relying on the friendliness of someone there who was willing to help them. And it turned out that these people were really just there to mug them and take their stuff. Um, and all the while this is going on, you can see what the police's reaction to this is. You have this one sort of almost strolling down the street happily, waving his baton. The other police officer here, right in front of all of the con people, essentially falling asleep on the park bench, waiting and watching all of this happen. Right, and you can see here this is happening just in the eyesight here of this police officer. And so this is sort of a cartoon that gets at a lot of these so-called immigrant catchers who are preying off of these groups of people who are just off the boat, just into America. Here's another cartoon to get at that idea of nativism. Um, and I think you've seen this one before, and that's fine, but let's go over it again. So here you can see the date is 1876, just a little bit after the end of Reconstruction. And oh, sorry guys, my mouse wheel is very sensitive, keeps on doing that. So this image here is meant to be an Irishman, but it's meant to be an immigrant, and they're in the North. So what this cartoon essentially is saying that immigrants in the North are about equal to freed slaves in the South, right? Like they're on the same par as each other in terms of how the country views them and favors them. And as we remember from Reconstruction, African Americans were treated very poorly through violence, through Jim Crow laws, right, through black codes. These freedmen in the South had very little rights and very little respect. And that's going to be true of immigrants in the North. Also, they're sort of on that same playing field. And this cartoon really is, I would consider a nativist cartoon because it sort of shows like the disregard towards to immigrants. When you compare immigrants to former slaves, particularly in 1876, and the attitudes that Americans have towards both of these at the time, this is not a favorable outlook towards immigrants. Um, Based on what we know how the South treated those freedmen, we're looking at similar treatment in the North for immigrants, and we can't say that that's a positive thing when we look at that. So you can see here there's a lot of issues here that immigrants have to deal with when they're coming to the new world, and there are very little people here to actually help them. But one of the people that do help them, or one of the organizations, if you will, that do help immigrants a little bit are called political machines. And even though political machines provide help and care to immigrants, it is in a completely corrupt way that is a perfect embodiment of what we've been talking about with the Gilded Age. So the Gilded Age looks nice and shiny on the outside, but has that rotten, dirty shoe underneath, right? And so that's sort of what this is. These political machines, so we're talking about city politics, we're talking about mayors of cities and the machine that they run. Basically, what a mayor would do is they would help immigrants assimilate and get their feet sort of set in a new city. So maybe a boss of a political machine might give a new immigrant a job at City Hall so they could be on the payroll. They might help them with housing and help them pay rent for newly arrived immigrants. They'd give them food and clothing so they could, help fix some of these problems. They might even get some schools built in their areas to help them with language. A lot of these struggles that immigrants are facing, political machines will step in and help with them. But the problem is they're not helping out of the goodness of their own hearts, but rather they're helping out of a desire to help themselves. So this is sort of a tacit agreement. This is sort of an unspoken agreement here between the immigrants and the political machines. And the idea here is that I will help you if you help me. In other words, I can give you a job, I can give you a house and food and clothes, but you're going to have to vote for me. Okay? And that might not sound too bad. It's a really good deal for the immigrants, right? Except the political machines didn't want these people just to vote once, right? The idea is that you go and vote the first time with a full beard and vote for me, and then shave your beard into a goatee and then go and vote again, and then shave your goatee into a mustache and go and vote a third time, all for me. And then, you know what, since we're at it, just for good measure, shave off your mustache, go clean shaven, and vote for me for a fourth time. And what this will do is it keeps these political machines in power while also providing some help to these immigrants. But that help from the immigrants, these jobs, the food, all of this is coming from tax dollars. It's coming from the city's budget. And so essentially, these corrupt political bosses are using taxpayer dollars to keep themselves in power, and the system is completely corrupt. The most famous of these is a guy by the name of Boss Tweed. So this is Boss Tweed here. He ran the Tammany Hall political machine in New York City. And as you can see, Boss was known for being quite a large man and known for his willingness to spend money. And I think this last cartoon that we'll look at today is a perfect example. So up at the top here, we have the New York City Treasury, so where all the New York City's tax dollars would go, right? And you have Boss Tweed walking out with all of his cronies, and if you look, most of their pockets are full and sagging. Right? You can see them all holding onto their pockets as they come out of the Treasury. The insinuation, of course, being that they went in and raided the Treasury and lined their own pockets with it, which is definitely what's happening. These guys are getting rich by basically embezzling money from these city treasuries. All the while, these big cats robbing the city blind of all of their money are being saluted by the police as they walk out of the Treasury, right? Because he's the mayor. But then let's compare that then to like the poor beggar, maybe the industrial worker, maybe the immigrant, right? With their family who is just starving and just needs some food. So they go into the bakery to steal some bread for dinner, and you see the results. You see the police on them immediately, ready to beat them with his nightstick there, and ready to arrest this gentleman just for stealing a loaf of bread from the bakery to feed their family. And so, of course, the ironic nature of this cartoon is that the really bad criminals, the political machines, the Boss Tweeds, are going scot-free and being saluted by the police, while the petty crimes, which are being done just to help feed their families, are being punished severely by the police. And so, who's the real criminal between them, right? So we're getting close to 15 minutes here, and I don't want to make this video too long, so we'll go ahead and stop here. Um, Again, as a reminder, there'll be a sub in the room Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday for you guys, and I will finally be back next Friday. I'll try to keep the lessons as educational as I can, but again, please make sure you guys are diligent in completing your lessons here while I am out of class. All right, everyone, have a great weekend, and I will see you all next week.